Welcome back to Suntest Channel. You know the best place for entrepreneurs to learn and share with each other.
It really is.
Today, we're going to do a deep dive into design thinking.
Ooh, very exciting.
I know, right? And it's so relevant for all of you startups out there.
Yeah, especially for startups.
So to guide us on this deep dive, we're going to be looking at this great article called How to Implement Design Thinking Steps in Your Startup.
I love that title.
I know, right? It's so straightforward.
Catchy.
So the first thing that this article talks about is empathy.
Of course.
And this is the first step in design thinking.
Right.
I feel like so many people talk about empathy.
Yeah, it's a very common business buzzword these days.
But what does it really mean for startups?
Wow.
And this article gives this great example of Uber Eats.
Oh, perfect example.
So it's not just like sending out a survey to your customers and being like, hey, what do you want?
No.
It's like really
Right.
observing them and how they're interacting with your product.
Yeah, and in the case of Uber Eats, they actually observe the entire customer journey. Wow.
So they looked at everything from how people were browsing restaurants on the platform
Mm-hmm.
to, what kind of food people were ordering,
Interesting.
how restaurants were preparing the food, and even how the delivery drivers were interacting with both the restaurants and the customers.
That is so in-depth. I love that.
It's pretty fascinating.
So why is this kind of focus on the customer so important for startups specifically?
I mean, I think it's important for all businesses,
Sure.
but for startups especially, it's really all about understanding your customers' problems.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, you're building a product or a service to solve a problem.
Right.
And if you don't truly understand that problem, you're much more likely to fail.
That makes sense.
So by empathizing with your customers, by really putting yourself in their shoes, you can identify those pain points,
Yeah.
those areas where you can truly add value.
So you're not just kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing
Right.
what sticks. You're
Right.
being very strategic about where you're focusing your efforts. Absolutely. And that's particularly important for startups because they often have limited resources.
Right.
So you really want to make sure you're solving a real problem that people are willing to pay for.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of empathy, but
Yeah.
how can startups actually put this into practice?
So there are a few key things you can do.
Okay.
First and foremost, talk to your customers.
Right.
Get out of the building and have actual conversations with your target audience.
So conduct user interviews.
Exactly. User interviews are a great way to gather qualitative data about people's needs, their motivations, their pain points.
Okay.
You can also observe people in their natural environment.
Oh, interesting.
So if you're building a product for, let's say, busy parents, you might spend some time observing them at the grocery store or at the park
Got it.
to see how they interact with the world and what challenges they face.
That's really interesting.
And then finally, you can also analyze the data you already have.
Oh, right, like customer feedback.
Yeah. Customer feedback, website analytics, social media interactions.
Sure.
All of this data can provide valuable insights into your customers' behavior and preferences.
So it's kind of like a mix of qualitative and quantitative research.
Exactly.
You're getting the stories and then you're backing it up with the numbers.
Precisely.
So now that we've talked about empathizing with the customer, what's the next step?
So once you have a deep understanding of your customer's needs, the next step is to define the problem you're trying to solve.
Okay, so there's this great quote in the article.
Oh, I love a good quote.
Me too.
What is it?
It says, and I quote, "Understanding your customer's problems first is an essential step to follow. It allows you to review your hypotheses and understand how you can refine your problem-solving methods and approach them for a different perspective."
That's a really powerful quote.
It is.
Because it highlights the importance of really taking the time to understand the problem before jumping into solutions.
Right.
It's so tempting to just dive right in and start building something.
Yeah.
But without a clear understanding of the problem, you're just shooting in the dark.
And that's where you waste a lot of time and money.
Exactly.
So going back to our Uber Eats example,
Yes.
how did they actually define the problem they were trying to solve?
So through their in-depth observations of the customer journey, they identified a few key friction points.
Okay.
For example, they noticed that a lot of customers were struggling to find the most popular items from a particular restaurant.
That makes sense.
Like if you're ordering from a new place,
Yeah.
you often want to see what other people are getting.
Absolutely.
So based on this observation,
Uh-huh.
they decided to define their problem as, how might we make it easier for customers to find the most popular items from a restaurant?
Okay, so they took that observation and they turned it into a clearly defined problem statement.
Exactly.
And that's super important for the next stages of design thinking.
Absolutely.
So for all of you listening out there, tell us about the challenges you're facing when it comes to understanding your customers.
Yeah. What are your biggest hurdles?
Share your experiences in the comments below. We would love to hear from you.
We're all in this together.
So once you have a clear problem statement,
Right.
what happens next?
The next stage is where things start to get really exciting.
Ooh, tell me more.
This is the ideation phase,
The ideation phase.
where you brainstorm potential solutions to the problem you've defined.
So this is where all the creativity comes in.
Absolutely.
I love that.
The goal here is to generate as many ideas as possible,
Okay.
no matter how crazy or outlandish they might seem.
So you're not judging ideas at this point.
Not at all.
You're just letting them flow.
Exactly. You want to create a safe and collaborative environment where everyone feels comfortable sharing their thoughts.
And the article talks about how Uber Eats actually fosters this culture of collaboration.
They do.
How so?
Well, they encourage cross-team brainstorming sessions.
Interesting.
So they bring together people from different departments like engineers, designers, product managers, even customer support representatives.
So it's not just like the product team sitting in a room by themselves.
No, they really believe in getting diverse perspectives.
And why is that so important?
Well, when you have people from different backgrounds and areas of expertise coming together, you're much more likely to come up with truly innovative solutions.
It's like that saying, two heads are better than one, but amplified.
Exactly. And it also helps to break down silos
Oh, sure.
and improve communication across different departments,
That makes a lot of sense.
which is really important for any company, but especially for startups.
I love that.
And let's not forget that collaboration is just more fun.
It is.
It boosts team morale and creates a sense of shared ownership over the final product or service.
So before we move on to the next stage of design thinking,
Yeah.
if you're finding this deep dive helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to SunTust's channel for more insights tailored for entrepreneurs just like you.
We appreciate your support.
So we've got all these great ideas from the ideation phase, but now what?
Now it's time to start bringing those ideas to life
Ooh, how do we do that?
through prototyping.
Prototypes.
It's all about creating tangible representations of your ideas.
Okay.
Whether it's a simple sketch on a napkin, a clickable mock-up,
Right.
or even a 3D printed model.
So it doesn't have to be perfect at this stage.
Not at all. The goal is to create something quickly and cheaply that you can use to test your assumptions and gather feedback.
The article actually talks about how important it is to have a culture of experimentation within a startup.
It really is crucial.
Because you're not going to get it right the first time.
Nope.
So the more you can experiment and test, the better.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to our Uber Eats example.
Yes.
Remember how they identified that problem of people struggling to find the most popular items? Well, they didn't just jump in and redesign the entire app.
Okay.
They started with a small experiment.
What did they do?
They tested a feature that simply highlighted the most popular items on the menu.
Interesting.
And they only rolled it out to a small group of users in a single city.
So they were being very strategic about their testing.
Exactly. They wanted to see if this feature actually solved the problem before they invested more time and resources into it.
And what were the results?
The results were overwhelmingly positive.
Wow.
People loved the new feature.
So it really did solve that problem.
It did, and based on that feedback, Uber Eats decided to roll out the feature to all of their users globally.
That's incredible.
It's a great example of how a small experiment can lead to a big impact.
And it highlights one of the core principles of design thinking.
Which is
Iteration.
iteration, exactly. You're not aiming for perfection right out of the gate.
Okay.
It's about constant learning, refinement, and adapting to user feedback.
And that's what the next phase of design thinking is all about.
Testing and validating your idea.
So it's like a cycle.
It is.
A continuous process of learning and improvement. You're constantly getting feedback and using that feedback to make your product or service better.
Precisely. And that means you might need to revisit previous steps in the process.
Okay.
Maybe you need to go back to the ideation phase and come up with new ideas. Or maybe you need to tweak your prototypes based on user feedback.
Right.
But the key is to be flexible and open to change.
That's such an important mindset shift for a lot of startups.
It is, because in the fast-paced world of startups, you can't afford to be too attached to your ideas.
Yeah.
You need to be willing to adapt and pivot based on what you're learning.
So we've covered a lot of ground here,
We have
from empathy to problem definition
ideation prototyping.
and the iterative nature of the process.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's so valuable for startups.
Absolutely.
So before we move on to part 2 of our deep dive,
Yes?
I want to hear from you.
What are your thoughts?
What are your biggest takeaways from this discussion so far?
What resonated with you the most?
Share your thoughts in the comments below.
We love hearing from you.
And we'll continue this conversation in part 2.
Stay tuned. So you know what's really interesting about design thinking is it almost seems deceptively simple
It really does.
when you break it down into those core elements.
Like empathy, prototyping, testing.
Like those aren't exactly groundbreaking concepts on their own right.
Right, they've been around forever.
But I think it's the way they all come together in this framework.
And this emphasis on the user's perspective.
Throughout the entire process, that's where the magic really happens.
Absolutely, and that's what makes it so powerful for startups.
It's about weaving those principles into the very fabric of your startup's culture.
So it's almost like a collective mindset shift.
Exactly, moving away from that traditional top-down approach to innovation.
And embracing a more collaborative, user-centric model.
That's a great way to put it, and I think that's where the article's focus on teamwork and cross-functional collaboration really comes into play.
It's so important, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just about designers working in isolation anymore.
Exactly. It's about bringing together diverse perspectives from across the entire organization.
Harnessing the collective wisdom and creativity of the entire team.
Absolutely.
And I can imagine this kind of collaboration might be a bit challenging for some startups.
Yeah, I mean, especially in those early days when resources are tight.
And everyone's wearing multiple hats.
Exactly, but I think it's an investment that pays off in the long run.
You think so?
I do. I mean, the article even highlights how Uber Eats, even as a rapidly growing company, still prioritizes cross-team collaboration.
They do.
They do. They encourage their team members to step outside their silos.
So get out of their comfort zone.
Exactly. And they actually have dedicated time for people to work together on ideation sessions.
Wow, so they really prioritize it.
They do. And I think that cross-pollination of ideas leads to breakthroughs that wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
It's taking the two heads are better than one philosophy to a whole new level.
Right.
I love that.
And I think it speaks to this broader point about fostering a culture of experimentation within a startup.
So important.
It's about creating a safe space where people feel empowered to take risks.
To try new things.
And even to fail.
Fail.
Yeah, because often those failures pave the way for even bigger successes down the line.
Right, you learn so much from failure.
Absolutely, and that brings us back to something we discussed earlier.
What's that?
The iterative nature of design thinking.
Oh, right. It's not about striving for perfection on the first try.
Exactly. It's about embracing those inevitable setbacks as valuable learning opportunities.
So important, and that's a particularly crucial mindset for startups, I think.
Definitely, especially when you consider that they're often operating in these really rapidly changing and uncertain environments.
So you're saying that being comfortable with ambiguity?
Yeah, like with not having all the answers right away.
Yeah.
That's actually a superpower in the startup world.
I love that. Ambiguity is a superpower.
It really is. It's about being adaptable, being willing to pivot based on feedback,
Sure.
and constantly iterating your way to a solution that truly resonates with your target audience.
Makes sense. And before we move on, I want to touch on a concept that's often mentioned alongside design thinking.
Okay, what's that?
The idea of a minimum viable product, or MVP.
Ah, yes, the MVP.
Have you heard of that?
Of course. I mean, it's all about getting a bare bones version of your product or service out into the world as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and why is that?
To start gathering real world feedback.
So it's like dipping your toes in the water before taking the full plunge.
Precisely. And it aligns perfectly with those principles of design thinking we've been talking about.
Great.
Particularly the emphasis on rapid prototyping and testing.
Yeah,
By
right.
launching an MVP, you're essentially creating a real-world experiment.
Interesting.
You're gathering data about user behavior and preferences.
Without investing a ton of time and resources up front.
Exactly. And then that data can inform your next iteration.
So it's almost like a feedback loop.
It is. It's a continuous cycle of learning and improvement,
That makes sense.
driven by direct user feedback.
So it sounds like the MVP is almost like a secret weapon for startups.
Ooh, I like that.
A way to de-risk the innovation process.
Totally. It's about validating those assumptions and making sure you're building something that people actually want.
Right, because you don't want to spend months building something that nobody wants.
Exactly. I think that's a great way to put it.
I think so too.
It's about turning assumptions into validated learning.
And that's just invaluable for any startup, especially in those early stages. So to recap, we've talked about the importance of empathy, collaboration, iteration, and the MVP.
It seems like design thinking really touches on every aspect of the startup journey.
I think you're right. And what's fascinating to me is that it's not just about creating amazing products and services.
It's not.
It's about cultivating this culture of innovation and customer centricity within the entire organization.
It's about baking that user-focused approach into the very DNA of the company.
Exactly. And that's what can truly set a startup apart in a crowded marketplace.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're getting close to wrapping up part 2 of our deep dive. But before we do, I want to pose a question to all of you listening out there.
Ooh, a good thought-provoking question. I always like those.
So we've explored how design thinking can be applied to product development, marketing, even internal processes.
Right.
But I'm curious, how do you think these principles could be applied to challenges outside of the traditional business world?
Oh, that's a great question.
I'm thinking about things like social issues, community engagement, even personal challenges. Could design thinking help us tackle those things as well?
I love that you're thinking outside the box.
We would love to hear our listeners' thoughts on this
Yeah, share your ideas with us.
in the comments below.
We love a good discussion.
And if you're finding this deep dive helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to SunTu's channel for more insights to fuel your entrepreneurial journey.
We really appreciate your support.
All right, so stay tuned for part 3, where we'll be exploring some real-world case studies of startups that have successfully implemented design thinking principles.
I'm excited to see how they put it all into practice.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be fascinating to see how they've used this approach to overcome challenges and achieve some pretty remarkable results.
Absolutely.
See you mold away.
All right, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into design thinking for startups.
I'm so excited.
Me too. We've talked about the principles,
The mindset.
on process.
Yeah, it's all been very theoretical so far.
It has.
So I'm excited to see some real-world examples.
Me too. So now it's time to see design thinking in action.
Let's do it.
We're going to explore some real-world case studies of companies that have successfully implemented these principles, and I think you'll be amazed by the results.
I'm sure I will be.
So let's kick things off with a company I'm sure you're familiar with,
Okay.
Airbnb.
Airbnb, wow. They're massive now.
I know, right?
How did they use design thinking? Well, what's fascinating is that they actually used design thinking very early on
Okay.
to overcome a major obstacle.
What was that?
In the beginning, they were really struggling to get people to book rooms in strangers' homes.
Yeah, that makes sense. That was a pretty radical concept back then.
It was
I bet there was a lot of hesitation.
a lot of mistrust.
Trust is huge in any kind of sharing economy platform.
Absolutely. So what did Airbnb do?
I'm all ears.
They embraced those core principles of empathy and prototyping.
Okay.
They actually went out and stayed in some of the listings themselves.
Wow, they really got into it.
They did.
That's dedication.
They talked to hosts. They listened to guests.
So they really immersed themselves in the experience.
They wanted to understand those concerns from both sides.
That's a great example of going beyond those surface-level feedback forms.
It is. They really put themselves in the shoes of their users.
It's smart.
And through this process, they actually uncovered some really crucial insights.
Like what?
Like, for example, they realized that having professional photos of the listings made a huge difference
Interesting.
in terms of building trust and showcasing those spaces.
Makes sense. You want to see what you're getting into.
Exactly.
It's amazing how, like, a small detail like that can have such a big impact on people's perception.
And that wasn't all.
What else?
They redesigned the platform
Okay.
to make it easier for guests to communicate with hosts, to read reviews, to get a more comprehensive sense of the overall experience before booking.
So they really used prototyping and testing to validate their assumptions, to gather that feedback, and to iterate their way to a solution that addressed those initial trust barriers.
Exactly, and the results speak for themselves.
They do. I mean, Airbnb revolutionized the travel industry.
They created a global phenomena.
Powerful stuff.
It's a powerful testament to how design thinking can help startups overcome even the most daunting challenges.
So true.
All right, for our next case study, let's shift gears to the world of healthcare.
Okay, I'm in.
Have you heard of a company called PillPack?
The name rings a bell. I think they're in the pharmacy space.
You got it. And they saw an opportunity to improve the experience for people who take multiple medications daily.
That's a huge pain point for so many people.
Especially for elderly patients.
Yeah, or those managing chronic conditions.
It can be a real struggle to keep track of all those pills.
Absolutely. So what did PillPack do?
They took a design thinking approach to completely reimagine the pharmacy experience.
Okay, how so?
So instead of those traditional bottles with the hard-to-read labels,
Right, those are the worst.
they pre-sort medications into individual packets,
Oh, wow.
clearly labeled by date and time.
That's brilliant.
It is right.
So much easier to manage.
It simplifies the process, and it minimizes the risk of error.
Which is so critical when it comes to medication.
Absolutely.
So they're really prioritizing patient safety.
Exactly, and they didn't stop there.
What else did they do?
They also developed a super user-friendly app
Nice.
so that patients could easily manage refill,
track shipments.
even communicate with pharmacists directly.
Wow. So they really thought of everything.
They took a holistic approach to the user journey.
Identified all those little moments of friction and design solutions that really put the patient first.
And again, their success speaks for itself.
Yeah, what happened to them?
PillPack was acquired by Amazon,
Wow.
a clear indication of the value that they created through their design thinking approach.
That's amazing.
It is. These case studies are so inspiring.
You really are.
It's amazing to see how design thinking can empower startups
To disrupt industries.
to solve real-world problems.
And to make a positive impact on people's lives.
It's powerful stuff.
So powerful.
And that's what we're all about here on SunTust Channel.
What's that?
We want to equip entrepreneurs like you with the knowledge and tools you need to make a difference.
I love that.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into design thinking,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, shoot.
Think about the challenges you're facing right now in your own startup journey.
Mm-hmm.
What are some specific ways you can apply the principles of design thinking to tackle those obstacles?
That's a great question for everyone to ponder.
It is. And if you found this deep dive helpful, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to SunTust Channel for more insights to fuel your entrepreneurial journey.
We'd love to have you join our community.
We would. And that's all for today. Until next time, keep innovating, keep empathizing, and keep those user needs at the forefront of everything you do.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure. See you on the next one.
See you later.